The emergency room at Scarborough General was dead quiet for a Saturday night. That should have been Officer Mike Sullivan's first red flag. 23 years on the force in Toronto, and he'd never seen the ER this empty on a weekend. But nothing about May 23, 1987 was gonna be normal. The call came in at 2:14 a.m. Some guy had walked into the police station down on Markham Road, hands torn to shreds, rambling about maybe killing someone. The desk sergeant thought he was high as a kite, wouldn't be the first tweaker to show up with a guilty conscience and bloody knuckles. But this was different. The man was calm, too calm, like his brain hadn't caught up with what his body had done. "Where is he?" Sullivan asked the nurse at reception, a middle-aged woman who looked like she'd seen enough crazy shit to last 3 lifetimes. "Trauma Bay 2, she said, not looking up from her paperwork. "Doc's stitching him up now. Fair warning though, something's off about this one." Sullivan had heard that before. Every perp was off when they did something horrific. But when he pushed through those vinyl curtains and saw Kenneth Parks sitting on that gurney, he understood what the nurse meant. The guy looked like your typical suburban dad, soft around the middle, receding hairline, probably coached Little League on weekends. His hands were wrapped in white gauze, blood already seeping through in rust-colored patches. But it was his eyes that made Sullivan's skin crawl. They were empty. Not guilty, not scared, not even shocked. Just blank, like someone had hit the reset button on his brain. "Mr. Parks?" Sullivan kept his voice steady, professional. "I'm Officer Sullivan. Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Darker on the voice. Add background noise that suits the what he's saying. When he spoke, his voice was flat, almost robotic. "I think I killed some people, but I don't remember doing it." "You think?" Sullivan pulled out his notepad, though his hand was already reaching for his radio. "Who did you kill?" "My in-laws, the Woods, Dennis and Barbara." Kenneth stared at his bandaged hands like they belonged to someone else. "I woke up, and there was so much blood, but I don't remember driving there." That's when Sullivan called for backup. Because in all his years on the job, he'd never heard a confession that sounded less like a confession and more like a man discovering what he'd done for the very first time. Kenneth Parks wasn't supposed to be anybody special. Hell, if you'd asked his neighbors in Pickering about him a week before that night, they'd have said he was just another working stiff trying to make it in the suburbs. 23 years old, married to his high school sweetheart, father to a 5-month-old baby girl. The American dream, Canadian style. But dreams have a nasty habit of turning into nightmares when you're not looking. Kenny was a good kid, his buddy Trevor would later tell investigators. Yeah, he had his problems, but who doesn't? The man loved his family more than anything. Those problems, though, they were eating Kenneth alive from the inside out. It started with the gambling. Not the fun kind where you throw $20 on the Maple Leafs and laugh it off when they choke. No, Kenneth had developed a taste for the real deal. Underground poker games, bookies who didn't take "I'll pay you next week" for an answer. Darker on the voice. Add background noise. By March of '87, he was in deep. 30 grand deep, to be exact. His wife, Karen, didn't know the half of it. She thought they were just going through a rough patch. That's what Kenneth told her when the savings account mysteriously emptied. That's what he said when he got fired from his job at the electronics store for skimming from the register. He was stealing to pay off debts, his former manager would say. Desperate kind of stealing. The kind where you know you're going to get caught, but you do it anyway because you're out of options. But here's the kicker. Despite all that shit, the Woods family loved him. Dennis and Barbara Woods treated Kenneth like the son they never had. When Karen had told them about Kenneth losing his job, Barbara had pulled him aside at Sunday dinner. "Kenny," she'd said, using that mom voice that made grown men feel like kids again, "we're family. Whatever you need, you come to us. No judgment, no questions asked. That conversation happened 2 weeks before the murders. Kenneth's cousin, David, would later recall something strange. The last time I saw Ken, before it happened, he seemed different. Not angry or anything, just absent. Like his body was there, but his mind was somewhere else completely. He kept rubbing his temples, said he hadn't been sleeping right for weeks. The insomnia had started in April. Kenneth would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with numbers. What he owed, what he'd stolen, what would happen when everyone found out. Some nights, Karen would wake up to find him standing in their bedroom doorway, just standing there in his underwear, eyes open but not really seeing anything. Sleepwalking, she'd told her sister. Doctor says it's stress-related. If only it had been that simple. May 22nd, 1987 started like any other Saturday in the Parks household. Karen made pancakes while Kenneth played with baby Melissa on the living room floor. Anyone watching through the window would have seen a perfect little family, the kind you'd see in those Sears catalogs. But behind Kenneth's smile, something was breaking. He kept checking the clock, Karen would later testify, her voice cracking. Every few minutes, like he was waiting for something. When I asked him about it, he just said he felt off. That afternoon, Kenneth called his buddy Rick about their plans to help Dennis Woods fix his deck the next day. "Yeah, man, I'll be there bright and early," Kenneth had said. "Dennis has been so good to us, it's the least I can do." But Rick noticed something weird in Kenneth's voice. It was like he was reading from a script, real flat, you know? I asked if he was okay, and he just said he hadn't been sleeping, said he kept having these dreams. The dreams. Christ, the dreams. Kenneth had been having the same nightmare for 3 weeks straight. He was driving through complete darkness, couldn't see the road, couldn't see his hands on the wheel, but somehow he kept driving. In the dream, he'd arrive somewhere, he never knew where, and there would be screaming. Then he'd wake up, drenched in sweat, Karen shaking him because he'd been thrashing around like he was fighting someone. That Saturday evening, they watched TV like always. The Facts of Life, followed by Golden Girls, Karen's favorites. Kenneth sat there on their beat-up couch, but his mind was somewhere else. The gambling debt had ballooned to $35 grand after interest. Big Eddie, his bookie, had called that morning with a simple message: "Time's up, Kenny boy." Around 10 p.m., Kenneth did something he'd never done before. He went to the kitchen, grabbed a beer, and stood at the window overlooking their backyard. Just stood there, staring into the darkness. "What are you looking at?" Karen asked. "Nothing," he replied. "Just thinking about tomorrow, helping Dennis with the deck." At 11:30, they went to bed. Karen fell asleep almost immediately, but Kenneth lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling fan, making lazy circles in the darkness. His mother-in-law's voice kept echoing in his head. "We're family, whatever you need." At some point, Karen could never pinpoint exactly when, Kenneth's breathing changed. It went from the shallow, anxious breaths of someone wide awake to something deeper, more rhythmic. She assumed he'd finally fallen asleep. She was half right. Kenneth's conscious mind had shut down, but something else had taken the wheel. Something that had been building in the dark corners of his psyche for weeks, fed by stress, fear, and desperation. At 1:30 a.m., Kenneth Parks sat up in bed, eyes open but unseeing, and got dressed in complete darkness. Karen didn't stir. He walked downstairs, grabbed his car keys from the hook by the door, and stepped out into the warm May night. The thing wearing Kenneth's body had somewhere to be. The drive from Pickering to Scarborough should have been impossible. 23 kilometers through suburban Toronto, hitting 14 traffic lights, making 7 turns, merging onto Highway 401, the busiest freeway in North America, all while completely unconscious. But Kenneth Parks did it. Security footage from a Shell station at 1:47 a.m. showed a light blue 1981 Oldsmobile Cutlass running a red light at the intersection of Brock and Bailey. The car didn't slow down, didn't speed up, just cruised through like the light didn't exist. The overnight clerk, Tommy Newen, remembered it clearly. "Dude wasn't driving crazy or nothing," Tommy told cops later. "That's what was weird about it. Most drunk drivers, they're all over the place, right? This guy was driving perfectly straight, maybe 40 miles per hour, just ignoring everything. I watched him blow through that red and thought, that zombie's gonna kill somebody. Zombie. That word would come up again and again in witness statements. At 1:52 a.m., another driver, Sarah Mitchell, pulled up beside the Oldsmobile at a red light on Kingston Road. She was coming home from her shift at the hospital, exhausted but alert enough to notice something was seriously wrong with the driver next to her. His hands were at perfect 10 and 2 on the wheel, she said, but his head was tilted back, mouth open. I thought he was having a seizure or something. I honked my horn, tried to get his attention, nothing. The light turned green and he just drove, like he was on autopilot. Sarah followed him for 3 blocks, debating whether to call 911, but then the Oldsmobile merged onto the 401 and disappeared into the late-night traffic. She'd later identify Kenneth from a photo lineup, her hands shaking as she pointed to his picture. That's him. That's the zombie driver. The thing is, the route Kenneth took wasn't the fastest way to the Woods house. It wasn't even the way he usually went. When investigators mapped it out later, they found he'd taken a path that avoided 3 construction zones and a DUI checkpoint on Markham Road. Like something in his unconscious mind was navigating around obstacles his conscious mind couldn't have known about. Dr. Roger Broughton, the neurologist who'd later examine Kenneth, had a theory about this. The sleeping brain isn't dead, he explained to the jury. It's operating on a different frequency. Think of it like a computer running in safe mode, basic functions only, but those functions can be surprisingly complex. But here's what didn't make it into the official reports. 2 other drivers called 911 that night about the Oldsmobile. Both calls were logged but never followed up. Why? Because both callers described something that didn't make sense. Marcus Thompson, a long-haul trucker. The driver, man, his eyes were open, but they were wrong, like all white, no pupils. Gave me the goddamn creeps. Jennifer Cox, a bartender heading home. There were 2 people in that car. I swear to God, there was someone in the back seat. But when the car passed under the streetlight, the back seat was empty. At 2:10 a.m., Kenneth's Oldsmobile pulled into the driveway of 51 Sunrise Avenue, the Woods' modest bungalow. The engine stayed running for exactly 3 minutes. Neighbors would confirm hearing it idle. Then it shut off, and Kenneth Parks stepped out into the darkness, still asleep, still moving with terrible purpose. The porch light was on. Barbara Woods always left it on when she expected family to visit the next day. The front door was unlocked. Dennis Woods never believed in locking doors. This was Scarborough in '87, not downtown Detroit. Good neighbors don't need deadbolts, he used to say. That trust would cost him everything. What happened inside that house between 2:13 and 2:28 a.m. had to be pieced together from blood spatter patterns, defensive wounds, and the broken fragments of Kenneth's own memory. The forensics team, led by Detective Angela Morrison, spent 3 weeks reconstructing those 15 minutes of hell. Kenneth entered through the front door, silent as smoke. The house was dark except for the nightlight in the hallway, a little ceramic angel that Barbara had bought at a church sale. His shoes left perfect impressions in the carpet, size 10 Reeboks, walking with measured, deliberate steps toward the master bedroom. Dennis woke first. Maybe it was the creak of that loose floorboard outside their room, the one he'd been meaning to fix for months. Or maybe it was some primitive instinct, the kind that tells you a predator is near. He sat up in bed just as the shadow filled the doorway. "Kenny?" Dennis's voice was thick with sleep, confused but not yet afraid. "What are you doing here?" No answer. Kenneth stood there, backlit by that angel nightlight, swaying slightly like a tree in a breeze nobody else could feel. In his right hand was a tire iron from his trunk. When did he get it? How did he know it was there? These questions would haunt investigators for months. Barbara stirred beside her husband. "Dennis, what's wrong?" That's when Kenneth moved. The first blow caught Dennis in the shoulder as he tried to get out of bed. The sound, described by the neighbors who heard it through the open window, was like someone dropping a watermelon on concrete. Dennis fell back, his arm useless, screaming for Barbara to run. But Barbara Woods didn't run. This was Kenny, the boy who'd married their daughter, who'd eaten Sunday dinner at their table for 3 years. Instead of running, she tried to talk to him. "Kenny, sweetheart, what's wrong? Talk to me, honey. Whatever it is, we can fix it." Darker. Kenneth's response was to grab her by the throat with his free hand. Barbara clawed at his fingers, leaving deep scratches that would later be used as evidence. But here's the truly fucked up part. Witnesses say Kenneth was crying while he did it. Tears streaming down his blank face, like some part of him trapped inside was watching, horrified, unable to stop. Dennis, bleeding and desperate, managed to tackle Kenneth from behind. The two men crashed into Barbara's vanity, shattering the mirror into 1,000 pieces. Dennis fought like hell. The defensive wounds on his hands showed he'd grabbed the tire iron at least twice, his palms sliced to ribbons. But Kenneth had something Dennis didn't. The terrifying strength of someone who couldn't feel pain, couldn't feel fear, couldn't feel anything at all. The struggle moved into the hallway. Blood on the walls showed Dennis tried to crawl toward the kitchen, probably going for the phone or a knife. He made it 6 feet before Kenneth brought the tire iron down one final time. Barbara was still alive, gasping on the bedroom floor. Kenneth stood over her for exactly 43 seconds. They knew this because her hand knocked the alarm clock off the nightstand, freezing the time at 2:27 a.m. Then he knelt down, put his hands around her throat again, and squeezed until the gasping stopped. At 2:28 a.m., Kenneth Parks stood up, covered in blood, still holding the tire iron, and walked back through the house the same way he came in. He didn't run. He didn't hurry. He just walked, leaving bloody footprints on that pristine carpet, past that little angel nightlight, and out into the night. Kenneth Parks woke up behind the wheel of his Oldsmobile doing 60 on the Don Valley Parkway. Not the slow, groggy waking up most people experience. This was sudden, violent, like being yanked out of deep water. 1 second, nothing. The next second, everything. His first thought wasn't about the blood. It was about the pain. His hands were on fire, screaming agony radiating from his palms up through his wrists. He looked down and saw the steering wheel slick with blood, his own blood, coursing from wounds so deep he could see white bone through the torn flesh. What the fuck? What the... His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, high-pitched and panicked. That's when he noticed his clothes. His white t-shirt looked like someone had thrown a bucket of red paint on it. His jeans were soaked, stiff with drying blood. Not all of it was his. Kenneth swerved to the shoulder, tires screaming, nearly clipping a semi in the right lane. The truck driver laid on his horn, but Kenneth barely heard it. He was too busy staring at his hands, trying to piece together what the hell was happening. The last thing he remembered was lying in bed next to Karen, staring at the ceiling fan. Now he was here. Somewhere. When was now? He checked the dashboard clock. 2:34 a.m. He'd lost 3 hours. 3 fucking hours. Just gone. Panic set in like ice water in his veins. Kenneth looked around frantically, trying to figure out where he was, where he'd been. The passenger seat was empty. The back seat was empty. But there was something on the floor. A tire iron, covered in blood, and what looked like hair. Gray hair. Oh God. Oh Jesus Christ. What did I do? Fragments started coming back. Not memories exactly. More like watching a movie through frosted glass. A dark house. A hallway with a nightlight. Screaming. So much screaming. Barbara's face. Her eyes wide with terror and confusion. Kenny, sweetheart, what's wrong? Kenneth dry heaved, nearly vomiting into his lap. The pain in his hands was unbearable now, bones grinding against each other every time he moved. He looked at them again and realized the wounds weren't from a fight, they were from breaking through something. Glass? A window? No, not a window. The image came unbidden, his hands wrapped around a tire iron, swinging it down again and again, the impact vibrating up his arms, tendons in his palms tearing with each blow. I need help. I need police. I need to go to the police. Kenneth put the car back in drive with his mangled hands, each movement sending white-hot spikes of pain through his nervous system. He didn't know exactly where the nearest police station was, but some autopilot part of his brain, the same part that had driven him 23 kilometers while unconscious, knew the way. At 2:41 a.m., Kenneth Parks pulled into the parking lot of 42 Division on Markham Road. He sat there for a full minute, watching his blood drip onto the floor mats, trying to find words for what he was about to confess. Finally, he stepped out of the car and walked through those glass doors, leaving bloody handprints on the handle. "I think I killed some people," he would tell the desk sergeant. But even as he said it, part of him still didn't believe it was real. Detective Angela Morrison got the call at 3:17 a.m., right in the middle of a dream about her daughter's piano recital. The voice on the other end was Sergeant Phil Dawson from 42 Division, and he sounded rattled.
Darker. Phil had been a cop for 30 years. Nothing rattled him. "Angie, I need you down here now. We got a situation that doesn't make a lick of sense." 20 minutes later, Morrison stood in the lobby of 42 Division, staring at Kenneth Parks through the glass partition of Interview Room 2. He sat there like a broken mannequin, hands wrapped in blood-soaked towels, staring at nothing. "He walked in here 90 minutes ago, confessed to killing his in-laws, then asked if someone could call his wife," Dawson said, handing Morrison a coffee. "Here's the weird part. He has zero clue how he got to their house. Says the last thing he remembers is going to bed in Pickering." "He's lying," Morrison said automatically. 22 years as a detective taught you that everybody lies." "That's what I thought too, except..." Dawson pulled out an evidence bag containing a tire iron. "This was in his car. Crime scene just called from the Woods residence. Dennis is dead. Barbara's on life support at Scarborough General. Every detail Parks gave us matches the scene perfectly. But Angie, the guy's not acting like someone who just murdered 2 people." Morrison studied Kenneth through the glass. She'd interviewed hundreds of murderers, the remorseful ones, the psychopaths, the ones who claimed they snapped. They all had tells. The fidgeting, the rehearsed crying, the practice story that fell apart under questioning. Kenneth Parks had none of that. He just looked confused, genuinely, deeply confused. "Let's go talk to him," Morrison said. Inside the interview room, Kenneth looked up as they entered. His eyes were bloodshot, face pale as milk. "Did I really do it? Please tell me I didn't really do it." Morrison sat down across from him, clicking on her tape recorder. "Mr. Parks, I'm Detective Angela Morrison. I need you to walk me through your evening, starting from when you got home from work." "I didn't work yesterday. I got laid off 3 weeks ago." Kenneth's voice was flat, emotionless. Shock, Morrison thought, or a damn good act. For the next 40 minutes, Kenneth told his story, watching TV with Karen, going to bed. Then nothing until he woke up on the highway covered in blood. No gaps, no "I don't" recalls to cover his tracks, just a clean 3-hour blank space in his memory. Morrison leaned forward. "Kenneth, your car was seen running a red light at 1:47 a.m. Multiple witnesses place your vehicle driving erratically through Scarborough. You expect me to believe you were asleep?" "I don't know what I expect you to believe," Kenneth said, and for the first time, tears started rolling down his cheeks. "I don't know what to believe myself, but I swear to God, I don't remember driving there. I don't remember doing what you're saying I did." That's when Morrison noticed something that made her blood run cold. Kenneth's pupils. They were different sizes, the left one significantly larger than the right. She'd seen that before, usually in head trauma cases or people coming down from heavy drugs. When's the last time you used drugs, Kenneth? Never. I don't even smoke pot. Morrison made a note to have him tested anyway, but something was nagging at her, a detail that didn't fit. She pulled out crime scene photos, brutal stuff that usually made suspects look away or vomit. Kenneth stared at the images of Dennis and Barbara Woods, and his face showed genuine horror, like he was seeing them for the first time. Either Kenneth Parks was the best actor Morrison had ever encountered, or something truly bizarre had happened that night. Dr. Roger Broughton had seen some weird shit in his 20 years studying sleep disorders, but nothing prepared him for Kenneth Parks. When the court-appointed psychiatrist called him in May of '87, Broughton almost said no. He was a neurologist, not a forensic expert. But then he heard the details, and his scientific curiosity won out. "You're telling me this man drove 23 kilometers, committed a violent double homicide, and has zero memory of any of it?" Broughton asked over the phone. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Dr. Frank Smoking replied. "And Roger, I've examined him for 6 hours. Either he's the most sophisticated liar I've ever encountered, or something neurologically catastrophic happened in his brain that night." 3 weeks later, Kenneth Parks was checked into the sleep lab at Toronto Western Hospital, electrodes glued to his scalp, chest, and legs. Broughton watched from the observation room as Kenneth settled into the hospital bed, looking small and scared in his paper gown. "How's he been sleeping since the incident?" Broughton asked the attending nurse. "Like the dead," she said, then winced at her own word choice. "Sorry, but seriously, he goes under hard and stays under. No tossing, no turning. It's almost unnatural." That first night of monitoring, Broughton got his answer. At 2:14 a.m., almost the exact time Kenneth had left his house on May 23rd, the EEG went haywire. Kenneth's brainwaves showed something Broughton had only read about in medical journals, a violent surge from deep delta sleep straight into a state that looked almost like waking, but wasn't. "Jesus Christ," Broughton muttered, leaning closer to the monitors. "He's in parasomnia." But it was what happened next that made Broughton's blood run cold. Kenneth sat up in bed, eyes wide open but completely vacant. Then he spoke, voice flat and monotone. "I have to go. They're waiting for me." The nurses froze. Nobody had told Kenneth to do anything. This was supposed to be a passive monitoring session. Kenneth swung his legs out of bed and stood up, still asleep, and walked straight into the wall. Not stumbled, walked, like he expected the wall to open. He did it 3 more times, same spot, same purposeful stride, before Broughton intervened and guided him back to bed. Kenneth never woke up. In the morning, he had zero memory of any of it. Over the next 2 weeks, Broughton conducted every test known to sleep science: polysomnography, multiple sleep latency tests, neurological exams. What he found changed everything he thought he knew about sleepwalking. Kenneth Parks had a rare genetic condition called arousal disorder. His brain couldn't properly transition between sleep stages. But here's the kicker: it ran in his family. Kenneth's dad used to sleepwalk so bad they had to put locks on the outside of his bedroom door. His sister once drove 3 miles asleep and woke up in a Walmart parking lot. His cousin had night terrors so severe he punched through a window. But none of them had ever been violent. The human brain during deep sleep is essentially running on autopilot, Broughton explained to the prosecution team, knowing they'd hate what he was about to say. The frontal lobe, the part that controls judgment, morality, conscious thought, it's offline. What's left is the primitive brain, the part that operates on pure instinct and ingrained patterns. The prosecutor, a hard-ass named James Mitchell, wasn't buying it. So you're saying Kenneth's primitive brain just happened to drive him to his in-laws' house and kill them? That's awfully convenient, Doc. I'm saying it's possible, Broughton shot back. We've documented cases of people eating entire meals, having sex, even performing complex tasks while in parasomnia states. There's a case in Arizona where a woman painted an entire mural in her sleep. Another in Florida where a man mowed his lawn at 3 a.m. Perfectly straight lines, zero memory. But murder? There are 43 documented cases worldwide of homicidal sleepwalking, Broughton said quietly. In 1961, a man in England killed his mother-in-law with an axe. In 1981, a woman in Pennsylvania stabbed her husband 17 times. Both were acquitted. Both had no memory of the events. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, face red. And you're prepared to testify that Kenneth Parks is number 44? I'm prepared to testify that Kenneth Parks' brain scans are consistent with someone suffering from severe parasomnia. What the jury does with that information is up to them. But Broughton had a secret he didn't share with anyone. During one of the sleep studies, Kenneth had whispered something while in deep parasomnia. The debt. I have to pay the debt. Karen Parks sat in the witness box looking like she hadn't slept in weeks, because she hadn't. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, hands shaking as she gripped a tissue. This was the woman who was supposed to save Kenneth, to tell the jury what a good man he was. Instead, she was about to blow his case wide open. Mrs. Darker, the prosecutor James Mitchell began, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. How would you describe your husband's relationship with Dennis and Barbara Woods? They loved him, Karen said quietly. More than my own parents did, honestly. They treated Kenny like their son. And yet your husband owed them money, didn't he? Karen's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Mitchell pulled out a bank statement, waving it like a weapon. March 15th, 1987. Dennis Woods withdrew $15,000 from his retirement account. That same day, Kenneth made a payment to a man named Edward Big Eddie Russo. Care to explain that? The courtroom went dead silent. Even Kenneth's lawyer, Philip Rosen, looked blindsided. Kenny was in trouble, Karen finally whispered. The gambling debts. He was terrified they were going to hurt him, hurt us. Dennis found out and offered to help. He said it was a loan, no interest, pay it back whenever we could. A loan Kenneth had no way of repaying, Mitchell pressed. In fact, 2 weeks before the murders, Big Eddie contacted Kenneth again, didn't he? Demanding another $30,000. Karen nodded, tears streaming down her face. And did Kenneth ask Dennis for more money? Yes. Dennis said no. He said, Karen's voice cracked. He said Kenny needed to learn to stand on his own 2 feet, that he couldn't keep bailing him out. Mitchell let that hang in the air like a noose. So Dennis Woods, the man who'd been so generous, suddenly cut your husband off. How did Kenneth react? He was upset, but he understood. Dennis was right. Upset enough to kill? Objection! Rosen shot to his feet. Speculation, Your Honor. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Kenneth Parks had a motive. What Mitchell didn't present, because nobody knew about it yet, was what happened 3 days before the murders. Dennis Wood's neighbor, Margaret Chen, would come forward 6 months later, haunted by what she'd witnessed. She'd been watering her garden on the evening of May 20th when she heard shouting from the Woods' driveway. Kenneth and Dennis, standing by Kenneth's Oldsmobile, faces red with anger. "You're killing me here, Dennis," Kenneth had shouted. "These people don't fuck around. They'll come after Karen, after the baby." "Then you should have thought about that before you pissed away 50 grand, Dennis yelled back. "I'm done enabling you, Kenny. You're a grown man. Act like it." Kenneth had grabbed Dennis by the collar. Margaret was certain of it. Dennis shoved him back, and for a moment it looked like Kenneth might swing. But then he just got in his car and peeled out, tires screaming. Margaret didn't call the police. It was just a family argument, right? Happened all the time. But after the murders, that memory ate at her like cancer. Should she have said something? Would it have mattered? Then there was Barbara's sister, Susan, who revealed something even more disturbing during a police interview that never made it to trial. 3 weeks before her death, Barbara had called Susan crying. She said Kenny had been acting strange, Susan testified in a pretrial deposition. Coming over to their house at odd hours, just sitting in the driveway in his car. Not coming in, not calling, just sitting there. Dennis wanted to confront him about it, but Barbara said to leave it alone. She thought Kenny was having a breakdown. How many times did this happen? Darker on the voice. At least 4 that Barbara mentioned. Always late at night, always just sitting there in the dark, engine running. Watching, waiting, planning, or sleepwalking? The question was, which one? The trial of Kenneth Parks began on September 14, 1987, in a Toronto courtroom that felt more like a circus than a place of justice. Camera crews lined the hallways, reporters shoved microphones in everyone's faces, and the public gallery was packed with true crime junkies who'd camped out overnight for seats. Judge Harold Donnelly, a no-nonsense bastard with 30 years on the bench, wasn't having any of it. "This is a court of law, not a goddamn television studio," he barked on day 1. "Anyone disrupts these proceedings, I'll have you thrown out so fast your head'll spin." Kenneth sat at the defense table looking like a ghost. He'd lost 20 pounds since his arrest, his suit hanging off him like a scarecrow's clothes. Every time crime scene photos were shown, he'd close his eyes, shoulders shaking. Real remorse or an Oscar-worthy performance? The jury couldn't decide. Prosecutor James Mitchell came out swinging. His opening statement painted Kenneth as a desperate man backed into a corner, a gambling addict who'd run out of options and saw murder as the only way out. "Ladies and gentlemen, the defense will try to convince you that Kenneth Parks is a victim," Mitchell said, pacing in front of the jury box. "That some mysterious sleep disorder made him drive 23 kilometers, navigate traffic, enter his in-laws' home, and brutally murder 2 people who loved him. But the evidence will show you something far simpler. This was a man who owed money he couldn't pay, who'd been cut off by the very people who'd supported him, and who made a calculated decision to eliminate his problem permanently." Then came the witnesses. Big Eddie Russo, the bookie, took the stand looking uncomfortable in a suit that barely fit his massive frame. Yes, Kenneth owed him money. Yes, he'd made threats. But nothing serious, Eddie claimed, just business talk, like pay up or we'll break your legs, standard stuff. The jury didn't look reassured. Dr. Broughton's testimony was the turning point. For 3 days, he explained parasomnia in excruciating detail, showing brain scans, playing video of Kenneth's sleep study episodes, citing case after case of complex behaviors during sleep states. Mitchell tried to tear him apart. "Dr. Broughton, in all your research, have you ever documented a case where someone drove a car, avoided obstacles, and committed a murder while sleepwalking?" "Not personally, no." "So we're supposed to believe Kenneth Parks is the first?" Broughton adjusted his glasses, his voice steady. "Mr. Mitchell, before 1985, we'd never documented someone having full sexual intercourse while asleep. Then we did. Before 1979, we'd never seen someone cook an entire meal unconsciously. Then we did. The brain is capable of far more than we understand, especially when it's malfunctioning." But Mitchell had one more card to play. He called Karen back to the stand. "Mrs. Parks, did your husband ever discuss killing his in-laws while awake?" Karen's face went white. Once he made a joke, a stupid joke." "What kind of joke?"
He said, she could barely get the words out. He said, darker. On the voice, add background noise that suit the what he's saying. He said, if Dennis and Barbara died, we'd inherit enough to cover his debts. But he was kidding. He'd never. When did he say this? 2 weeks before it happened. The courtroom erupted. Judge Donnelly slammed his gavel, shouting for order, but the damage was catastrophic. Kenneth's lawyer looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Kenneth himself just stared at his wife, betrayal written across his face. That night, the local news ran with the headline, "Sleepwalking Killer or Cold-Blooded Murderer." The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 agonizing days where Kenneth sat in his cell, convinced he was going to death row for something he couldn't remember doing. On September 30th, 1987, they reached a verdict. Not guilty by reason of automatism. Kenneth Parks walks out of that courtroom a free man, and the world lost its mind. 3 months after the verdict, Detective Angela Morrison sat in her basement office at 42 Division, surrounded by case files she wasn't supposed to still have. The Kenneth Parks case was closed, filed away, done. But Morrison couldn't let it go. Something didn't add up, and it had been eating at her like a cancer. The timeline. That goddamn timeline. She spread out her notes across the desk, creating a map of Kenneth's journey that night. Security footage from the Shell station, 1:47 a.m. Sarah Mitchell's witness statement, 1:52 a.m. on Kingston Road. Marcus Thompson, the trucker, 1:58 a.m. on the 401. Kenneth's arrival at the Woods house, based on neighbor testimony about hearing a car door slam, 2:10 a.m. Morrison did the math again. 23 kilometers from Kenneth's house to the Woods residence. Driving at the speeds witnesses described, 40 to 50 miles per hour, the trip should have taken maximum 35 minutes. Kenneth left his house around 1:30 a.m. He arrived at 2:10 a.m., 40 minutes, right on schedule. Except there was an hour missing before that. Morrison pulled out another piece of evidence that had bothered her from day one. Kenneth's car had an extra 63 kilometers on the odometer compared to what it should have. She checked with Karen. Kenneth hadn't driven anywhere unusual in the days before the murder. So where the hell did those extra kilometers come from? You still digging into that sleepwalker case? Her partner, Detective Ray Santos, leaned against the doorframe, coffee in hand. Give it up, Angie. The jury bought the parasomnia thing. Parks is free. Case closed. The jury bought a story, Morrison shot back. Doesn't mean it's the truth. Look at this, Ray. Really look at it. She showed him the timeline, the odometer discrepancy, and then the piece that had been keeping her up at night. A traffic camera photo from 12:47 a.m., 43 minutes before Kenneth supposedly woke up and started sleepwalking. The photo showed Kenneth's Oldsmobile parked outside a convenience store on Morningside Avenue, just sitting there, engine running, headlights on. Could be a glitch in the timestamp, Ray offered, but even he didn't sound convinced. I called the camera company. Timestamp's accurate. So either Kenneth woke up, drove to this store, sat there for 45 minutes, then went back to sleep and drove to his in-laws' house. Morrison paused, letting the absurdity sink in. Or he was awake the whole time. Ray took the photo, studying it closely. Can you see the driver? Too grainy, but I had tech try to enhance it. Look at this. Through the windshield, you could barely make out a figure behind the wheel. And in the passenger seat, something that looked like a shape, a shadow. But the resolution was too poor to tell if it was a person or just a trick of the light. What's on Morningside Avenue? Ray asked. Morrison had already checked. 3 closed businesses, a laundromat, and... She pulled out another file. Big Eddie Russo's loan office, right across the street from where Kenneth was parked. The 2 detectives stared at each other. You think Kenneth met with Eddie that night? Ray asked quietly. I think Kenneth might have had help, Morrison said. And I think someone else knows exactly what happened in that house. She picked up her phone and dialed Big Eddie's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. When she tried again the next day, the number was disconnected. Big Eddie Russo had vanished. Dr. Patricia Hammond had been studying sleep-related violence for 15 years when the Kenneth Parks case landed on her desk. She ran the International Sleep Disorders Database out of a cramped office in Boston, cataloging every documented case of parasomnia-related crimes worldwide. When she read about Parks' acquittal, something clicked in her brain, a pattern she'd been tracking for 3 years but couldn't quite pin down. She pulled 6 case files and laid them out on her desk, her hands trembling slightly. Case 1, Michael Patterson, Phoenix, Arizona, 1983. Drove 18 miles while allegedly asleep, killed his business partner who owed him money. Acquitted on sleepwalking defense. Partner's wife reported seeing a second car following Michael's that night. Police never investigated. Case 2, Rebecca Lowry, Manchester, England, 1985. Allegedly sleepwalked to her aunt's house and pushed her down the stairs. Darker on the voice. And had just changed her will, cutting Rebecca out. Not guilty by reason of automatism. Neighbors reported Rebecca's car parked outside the aunt's house 3 hours before the sleepwalking episode occurred. Case number 3, David Chen, San Francisco, 1984. Supposedly unconscious when he strangled his uncle who'd refused to loan him money for gambling debts. Acquitted. Security footage showed David's car circling his uncle's block 4 times before parking. Case number 4, Jennifer Morrison, Dublin, Ireland, 1986. Claimed no memory of stabbing her mother-in-law who was threatening to expose Jennifer's affair. Found not guilty. Mother-in-law's neighbor saw Jennifer sitting in her car outside the house for over an hour, wide awake, before going inside. Case number 5, Thomas Whitaker, Melbourne, Australia, 1982. Drove 26 kilometers, allegedly asleep, killed his father-in-law over a business dispute. Acquitted on parasomnia defense. The father-in-law had filed a police report 2 weeks earlier, claiming Thomas had threatened him. Case number 6, Kenneth Parks, Toronto, Canada, 1987. Hammond stared at the files, her stomach churning. 6 cases in 5 years, across 4 countries, all with the same elements: financial motive, family victims, long-distance driving while asleep, and, most disturbing, witnesses who saw the perpetrators awake and aware hours before the alleged sleepwalking began. But here's what really freaked her out. All 6 defendants had been represented by lawyers who'd consulted with the same expert witness, Dr. Roger Broughton. Hammond picked up her phone and called Detective Morrison in Toronto. They'd been corresponding since Morrison read one of Hammond's research papers. "Angela, I need you to sit down for this," Hammond said when Morrison answered. "I'm already sitting. What have you got?" "I think someone's gaming the system. I think there's a network, lawyers, sleep experts, maybe even the defendants themselves, who figured out that parasomnia is the perfect defense." No memory, sympathetic juries, expert testimony that's basically impossible to disprove. And Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're saying Kenneth Parks might have faked the whole thing?" "I'm saying 6 people in 5 years have used almost identical defenses for premeditated murders, and all 6 walked free. What are the odds? What are you going to do with this?" Hammond looked at the files again, at the pattern nobody else had seen. "I'm going to find out who's teaching them how to get away with murder." Kenneth Parks tried to disappear after the trial, but you can't really disappear when you're the most infamous sleepwalker in Canadian history. He and Karen moved to a small town outside Ottawa, changed their last name to Parsons, and tried to rebuild a life from the ashes. It didn't work. The anonymous letters started 3 weeks after the verdict. No return address, just plain white envelopes shoved through the mail slot with messages scrawled in block letters. "Murderer. We know you were awake. Barbara Woods is watching you sleep." Karen found Kenneth burning them in the backyard one night, tears streaming down his face. "They won't leave us alone," he whispered. "They'll never leave us alone."
The marriage lasted 8 months after the acquittal. Karen took baby Melissa and moved back in with her parents, filing for divorce in June of 1988. In the court documents, she cited irreconcilable differences, but her sister told a different story to anyone who'd listen. Karen would wake up in the middle of the night and Kenneth would be standing at the foot of the bed, just staring at her, the sister said. When she'd ask what he was doing, he'd say he didn't remember getting up.
She was terrified he'd kill her next. Kenneth's own family turned their backs on him. His father, the man who'd also suffered from severe sleepwalking, gave one interview to the Toronto Star before cutting off all contact with his son. "I've sleepwalked my whole life," the elder Parks said. "Crashed through windows, walked into traffic, scared my wife half to death. But I never hurt anyone, not once. Because somewhere deep down, even in sleep, you know right from wrong. Kenny knew what he was doing." Detective Angela Morrison never stopped investigating. She spent 3 years of her own time tracking down leads, interviewing witnesses the prosecution had missed, following the money trail. In 1990, she finally got her break. Big Eddie Russo's body washed up on the shore of Lake Ontario, hands bound, bullet hole in the back of his head, standard mob execution. But before he died, Eddie had given an insurance policy to his lawyer, a sealed envelope to be opened only if something happened to him. Inside was a cassette tape. Morrison sat in her car and listened to Eddie's voice, recorded 2 weeks before his death. "If you're hearing this, I'm dead, and you need to know the truth about Kenneth Parks. That kid came to me a week before the murders, asking me to teach him how to fake sleepwalking. Said he'd read about some case in England. I told him he was crazy, but he offered me 15 grand to help him set it up. I took the money. God help me, I took the money." The tape continued, Eddie describing meetings, rehearsals, the plan. But here's the thing that made Morrison's blood run cold. Eddie said Kenneth had a partner, someone who helped him that night. Eddie never said who. Dr.
Patricia Hammond died in a car accident outside Boston in October 2022. Single vehicle collision, late at night, no witnesses. Police ruled it driver fatigue, but her research assistant found something strange when cleaning out her office. A USB drive hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Sleep Disorders and Criminal Behavior. The drive contained 37 years of research on Kenneth Parks and the 5 other cases, but it also had something else, a video file dated 3 days before Hammond's death. In it, she sat at her desk, looking 20 years older than her 63 years, eyes haunted. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead," she began. "I got too close to something, asked too many questions, but you need to know what I found." Hammond explained that in 2019, she'd tracked down Kenneth Parks, now Kenneth Parsons, living in a small town in British Columbia. He'd agreed to meet her at a diner, and what he told her changed everything. "I was sleepwalking," Kenneth said on the recording Hammond had made secretly. "At least, I was at first. I woke up on the highway, just like I testified, but—" his voice dropped to a whisper. "I woke up before I got to their house. I was on the 401, and suddenly I was aware. I was driving, and my hands were killing me. I'd already broken something, maybe hit my car, I don't know. And I remembered everything from before I fell asleep." Hammond's voice on the video. "What do you mean, everything?" "The plan. Karen and I had talked about it. If Dennis and Barbara died, we'd inherit their house, their savings, enough to cover my debts and start over. We'd researched sleepwalking defenses, found Dr. Broughton's papers."
Darker. Karen said if I could just say I didn't remember, if I could make it look like parasomnia. So it was premeditated? Kenneth started crying on the recording. "I thought it was,
But here's the thing, Doc. I don't remember making that plan. Karen says we never had that conversation. My lawyer showed me journal entries I supposedly wrote planning the whole thing, but I don't remember writing them. It's like there's two versions of that night in my head, and I can't tell which one's real anymore. Hammond paused the recording and looked directly into the camera. I've spent 3 decades studying this case, and here's my conclusion. Kenneth Parks has a dissociative identity disorder triggered by his parasomnia. When he sleepwalks, a different part of his consciousness takes over, a part that can plan, can remember, can execute complex tasks. But his waking mind has no access to those memories. She pulled out medical scans. I had him tested in 2021. His brain shows abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex consistent with severe dissociative episodes. Essentially, Kenneth Parks and the thing that killed Dennis and Barbara Woods are 2 different people sharing the same body. Hammond leaned closer to the camera. But here's what terrifies me. I found 18 more cases matching this pattern. 18 people who committed murders during parasomnia episodes and were acquitted. I tracked down 7 of them. All 7 reported the same thing Kenneth did. Fragmentary memories of planning their crimes, conversations they don't remember having, evidence of premeditation they can't explain. I think there's something neurologically wrong with all of them. A specific brain abnormality that allows conscious thought during unconscious states. And I think someone's been identifying these people and weaponizing their condition.
The video ended with Hammond holding up a list of names. The last name on the list was partially visible, Dr. Roger Bruch. The file corrupted there. The rest was unrecoverable. Detective Angela Morrison, now retired and 73 years old, received the USB drive in November 2023. She watched the video 7 times, then burned it. Some truths, she decided, were too dangerous to know. Kenneth Parks, or Kenneth Parsons, still lives in British Columbia. He takes medication for his sleep disorder, sees a therapist twice a week, and hasn't sleepwalked in 12 years. But sometimes, late at night, he stands in his kitchen and stares at his hands. The hands that tore tendons and shattered bones that May night in 1987, and wonders if the thing that did those terrible things is still inside him, waiting. Just waiting for him to fall asleep.